So I'm not going to claim to be the world's greatest DM. There are other DMs out there, but this is kind of a behind the screen, if you will, look at how I prepare for my D&D games and um, how things usually turn out. I'll do a recap of the previous session at the start of every video stream, and then try to tackle a particular theme of the prep that I'll be doing for that day. I'll try and do these regularly. Who knows if I will? I might not. Um, I couldn't get Word to stream properly, so the I'm using plain text in Notepad because that works, and I don't need pictures right now. So my theme for the day is atmosphere. This is something I need to work on myself, and something that I really firmly believe contributes to a immersive, consistent game experience. So, some context, the player party are currently on level 6, they leveled up at the end of last session, and for the most part, their gameplay experience has been pretty much limited to the city of Scour, a homebrew setting that I run my Monday D&D campaign in. And the hook I used to get them all together, because most of them are kind of first time players or have very limited experiences, just that they're members of the city secret police and they earn a wage. So this Notepad document is my brief description of Scour. Now, some of you may notice the weird formatting. I use Trello to keep my all my notes in order, so it's all Trello note formatting. So I just copy paste into the Trello board when I need to update anything. Earlier today, I added some like 3 phrases, sentences, keywords to evoke the feel of the discrete section of Scour. Scour's main conceit is that it's essentially many cities in behind one curtain wall, and it's ruled nominally from the other side of the continent by kind of trade agreements and mutual defense pacts and things like that. At the end of the last session, the party found themselves in the Shadowfell. So the kind of theme I'm exploring today is how do I take my prepared notes on the city of Scour and translate it to the Shadowfell, the realm of the plane of Shadow Night, largely ruled over by intelligent undead, and generally not a place you want to find yourself unexpectedly. Fortunately, one of my player party is a shadow sorcerer who, in his background, specified that he was kidnapped and raised in the Shadowfell, so he can function as general exposition and survival tips, but he's never been to this area of the Shadowfell, so hopefully it's all going to be a surprise for that player as well as everyone else. You might be wondering currently why I haven't got these notes before. Well, I typically don't prepare for sessions much. That's not my style. If I prepare too much, I'm constantly kind of flicking back to my preparations and doubting myself. So I generally improvise sessions, which, as any kind of long-term GM can tell you, has mixed results. So I didn't know the party were going to the Shadowfell until they went through a doorway, and I thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if the door was a portal to the Shadowfell? This did solve the problem of my party spending 4 weeks real time just shopping, because it worked out that they all split up, and I have at that point 5-player party. So we got through a day a session of them doing their own thing, morning, afternoon, evening. And I wanted to get away from that because that was slowing the game down a little. And I wouldn't like this is an extreme reaction to that. I wouldn't advocate everyone kind of changing the plane of the game to speed things up, but I thought this would kind of maybe push them out of their comfort zones a little and uh, make everything fresh again. Like, keep the momentum going forwards. I'm not I'm not one of those DMs who has like a big bad you must beat. You've got to do steps A through Z to beat the big bad, otherwise the world will end. I'm more trying to let the players do what they want, and then the world events are just happening in the background. And if they want to tackle those, fine. That's probably going to be the more interesting game, or certainly give them a greater sense of purpose and import in the world. And it's set up that they should, but equally, I'm not going to stop them from spending 4 weeks of real-time shopping, for example, to get what they want out of the game. And this is something I do know I need to talk to my players about. And I cannot stress the importance of talking to your players enough. Find out what they like, what they don't like, what they want, what they don't want out of the game. Because at the end of the day, it's collaborative storytelling. And I'm not here to kill them. I'm here to facilitate their play experience. And we're all here to tell a great story together. So, atmosphere. As I said earlier, I went through and added 3 kind of phrases to each of the locations in Scour. And I'm going to be scrapping all of that because that's prime material plane stuff. And I'm going to be converting it to Shadowfell atmosphere stuff. So Scour itself is to kind of lift the curtain a little bit. Scour is almost a utopia because its ruling council of 12, at least 3 of them that I know of, I haven't decided on any others. They're functionally immortal beings who know that something is coming. This whole campaign, levels 1 through 20, is designed as the first act of a 3-act story, culminating in this something arriving, a being from the far realm. And 3 of the 12 know that something is coming. So they're trying to set up this well-fortified, well-defended city so that when it does arrive, and because they'll still be alive when it arrives, they'll be in the best position possible to beat it. So on the prime material plane, Scour is very much a city of progress and, broadly speaking, happiness, for want of a better word. And it's divided into 2 main sections, cliff top and cliff bottom. As they sound, cliff top is everything on top of the cliff that Scour is built upon, and cliff bottom is everything within a few miles of the bottom of the cliff. It's important to note that there is no curtain wall for cliff bottom. Everyone living on cliff bottom is generally poorer than people living on cliff top. I wanted the players to experience a cultural dichotomy between the haves and the have-nots, and to have a multi-environment city in a way. So it's not just urban adventuring, because even though I have these districts, they're all miles across. So in places like the estates which is currently highlighted, that's just miles of stately homes where the richest people of the city live. But then you go to Cliff Bottom and there's the woods, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's mostly wooded area, but it's still technically classed as part of Scour, and it's where kind of hovels, hunters, charcoal burners, a lot of the wood comes from the woods, but it's all strictly maintained by a member of the 12 to ensure deforestation doesn't become a problem and lack of resources. So there's opulence and grandeur at the cliff top in the estates, but then the players end up in the woods, and it's more of it's a wooded setting, so you've got odd things there that could happen. Of course, being a city, it's mostly free of threat, but the last big story beat that led up to level 6 was a citywide almost coup where one of the lords of the city, uh, Lord Mance Hallister, he tried to take over his area, the area he lives, or the area his townhouse is in, the merchants, uh, by causing distractions in nearly every other area of the city. So in the woods, for example, he set into motion, and by he I mean like he and his cult and his followers, um, set into motion the corruption of a treant, and that was kind of corrupting the woods themselves. Plenty of twig and vine blights appeared. The treant itself was kind of a mini boss, and then if the players had gone elsewhere, the the sprawl was full of sort of zombified creatures. The players have no idea, but deep beneath the city in the Underdark itself, there's an aboleth, and that is using some magically resonant crystals to amplify its telepathic abilities to control the populace, essentially, through psychically animated meat puppets, for want of a better word, from a natural disaster that swept through the city a few years ago. So I tried to create kind of a world in miniature in the city, and the players, they like that, but they wanted difference, and they've had 5 levels over a year of real time of pretty much just the city. So, like, and this was a disconnect between expectations. And as I said, talk to your players, find out what they want, explain what you want out of the game. But now they're in the Shadowfell, I'm hoping it's kind of going to be fresh and new for them. So I need to take this near utopian city and convert it to a darkened mirror of itself. For those who don't know, the Shadowfell and the Feywild are opposing planes that kind of overlap the prime material plane where most D&D games are set, and function as mirror realms. So a castle in the prime material in the Shadowfell might be a ruin full of ghosts, and in the Feywild might be this gorgeous, gorgeous Fey city built out of a tree. The only I have had a brief. I did think briefly about this before starting the stream, and rather than a new utopian city, the theme of the Shadowfell version of Scour is primordial forest, lost souls. Type in fast when nervous. Wonderful. Primordial forest, lost souls, and the river that splits Scour. So Scour, as well as Cliff Top and Cliff Bottom is divided, much like Budapest or Ankh-Morpork in fantasy literature, by a river, the river Virtus. And in this game, the river Virtus in the Shadowfell is actually the river Lethe. I'm going more from Greek, like Mordecai's Tome of Foes does have more information on this, and I believe it's the Lethe that runs through the uppermost layer of the 9 hells. So my idea is that if the players want to, they can follow the Lethe out to the sea and then find kind of like a whirlpool or something that will take them to the 9 hells if they want to go there. So it's a city of a crumbling city of oblivion, where a lot of people that they encounter, because there are people living in the Shadowfell, and it is not inimical to life, but anyone who spends a long time in the Shadowfell is changed by the experience just through the nature of the place. Like eternal twilight, food is strange, water tastes and feels more like blood when you drink it, that kind of thing. It's kind of a very gothic horror place. and any wrong move, and say if you fall into the river, you lose yourself. It's going to be very much kind of people who encounter the river for any long period of time are at risk of losing all their memories and then all their personality, and then just becoming a mindless hulk devoid of anything but the need to survive. But as I said, there are people who live in this version of the city, and they've made great use of corpse light lanterns and torches and braziers, which is a difficult magical ritual to perform. It functions almost exactly like Turn Undead, but a permanent effect. So it kind of creates a safe area within its radius, diameter. Um, so there are people living here, but they're kind of in enclaves. And the way I sort of envision it is that each of the districts of the city is mostly this primordial forest full of undead and other native inhabitants to the Shadowfell, but it has small enclaves of survivors holding out. I know that the what in the prime material plane is known as the Scholars is going to be the enclave of the Knights Arcana. The Knights Arcana are essentially an order of Eldritch Knights, using class terminology, who are responsible for the policing of magic within the city and the kind of the near city region. One of my player party is in fact an initiate of the Knights. So this is a barracks. It's a permanent barracks of the Knights Arcana in the Shadowfell. They rotate periodically. I'm thinking once a month, just to kind of keep the members fresh, because there are psychological benefits, drawbacks of remaining in the Shadowfell, as I don't think I've mentioned yet. So being as it is a plane of twilight and shadow and undeath in D&D cosmology, it kind of saps your emotions. I think it's Mordekainen's Tome of Foes has stat blocks for the Sorrowsworn, which are people who are overcome by their last emotion, and that's their existence now. It's very much like the demons in Dragon Age, Bioware's Dragon Age setting, Theta setting. So, as I said, every month or so, the knights will rotate out. You'll get a new batch in, but they maintain a permanent military presence in Scour, where the scholars would be. Let's just put it in brackets, the scholars, so I don't forget what district these are replacing. So this area is under martial law, functionally speaking, but it's well defended, so kind of when players travel through it, I'll try and make reference to the fact that they see soldiers everywhere, that there's like everyone is armed, or there are well-signed shelters. Just to kind of, the last phrase to me indicates that there's a state of readiness in case the first two phrases fail. So hopefully that will help. And the Enclave of the Knights Arcana, I'm not going to make a note of it here, but I envision it having a permanent corpse light like lighthouse effect. So there's only the one corpse light burning, but it keeps the Enclave in the area around it safe from most undead. And the size of the effect, I think, will determine the efficacy of it against stronger undead creatures. So a torch will deal with basic undead, so just like zombies, anything below CR1 maybe. Brazier, CR2, and then something like this will be CR10, if not higher, because it's a permanent effect with a huge radius. The Knights Arcana themselves are as a part of responsible for policing magic, but they're attached to the Guardian of Magic, one of the 12 who rule the city, whose purview is specifically magic and magical learning and lore. So, in a way, they're going to have access to powerful magic like this. I'm going to leave locations blank for now. I'll probably add to them as we play, as I think of them. The next one I was thinking of is the merchants. Now, the merchants, as it sounds, is a mercantile district. But again, it's a mercantile district miles across. So it's still going to be a mercantile district, but this is the bone market. This is an idea I had at the end of the last session, and I thought it was really cool. So the players have killed the lord whose townhouse was in the merchants in the prime material plane, and they've worked their way backwards through the dungeon. Effectively, they started at the treasure vault, ended at the entrance. So they had some issue with the traps, but they handled them pretty well. And they've come out into this keep castle. Call it castle corpse fire, but with a Y. Not that anyone will ever check. I just like that spelling for fantasy names. Which is in ruins, like most things here are. Yes, the bone market is a titanic corpse with corpse-like braziers affixed to the rib cage, essentially, of this huge being. The being is skeletal, so it's clearly been there a long time, but something built, some power that it possessed, or due to its very nature, has withered the forest around it. So it's created clearings, and its entire impression, I guess, the space that this being was when it died, like an anti-fossil, I don't know, it's perfectly clear of forest, and this is where the survivors live. And the player party from Castle Corpsefire will be able to see it, but they'll have to go through this primordial forest to get there, and that's kind of my way of introducing them to the threats of the Shadowfell, because you should never just drop things on your players. They should have some kind of limited experience of it, foreshadowing. So this area I envision is being kind of relatively clear of the undead. As I said, the castle itself is going to have a corpse-like brazier on top, but it's going to be huge and a permanent spell effect. So it's well lit. So flickering shadows. These braziers, they cast light over the entire district, but it makes it difficult to see even when you're under the trees, because the trees themselves are withered. So I'm happy with that. There won't be any docks in this version of the Shadowfell, in this version of Scour, because the docks in the prime material plane are a purely kind of mercantile consideration. So I don't think we need them. I don't think the campaign, the location needs them. Pardon me, sorry. The only other idea I had, Seat of the 12. The Seat of the 12 is an island perched on the edge of a waterfall at cliff top, where the 12, the ruling council of the city, sit. Oh, the bone market survivors. place for supplies in the shadow file. Keeping it vague, I'll probably come back to this and flesh them out slightly when I'm not streaming. Understandably, I'm a tad nervous about this. I've never done anything like this before in terms of streaming and archiving and uploading to YouTube, which is where I plan to put this video. So my brain is a bit scattered, so I apologize for that, but I'll probably return to these and I might post a short text update or whatever about any changes I make to it. But the seat of the 12, I realized, could be the crumbling tower. So as I said, the Shadowfell is a plane of undeath, and there are a lot of powerful undead here. So I was thinking that the crumbling tower, well, empty now as a lot of these places are probably going to be, at one point was a Lich's tower or a wizard's tower of some sort. It's a pity I don't have any undying warlocks because it could be something cool for them. But so this will be a repository of lost lore, forgotten lore. Yeah, you've got to be slightly mystic about it. That's not how you spell repository. So kind of the immediate word that springs to mind is just forgotten. This place is, it's going to have an aura of decay and neglect. It's also going to be ruinous, but not just in like a few kind of stones have fallen out of the walls, odd plant life. It's a post-war ruin. Now, I'm not saying that a fight's necessarily broken out here or a war has broken out here, because I don't think it would have done. But there's been some definite malicious intent to destroy the tower, and it hasn't succeeded because the tower is still standing slightly. But it's that kind of ruin. It's got huge damage to it. Being inside it will probably be dangerous to people, and that's why no one goes in there. That's why a lot of the lore is forgotten. But also something like that is probably going to be magically protected. Probably construct, but again, that's something I probably will decide on the fly rather than finalizing now. And that is itself its own location, if you will. Well, the lock just won't exist. That's as you see, a dwarven mechanism that flat out won't exist in this version of Scour. And the fall, I don't think that'll exist because it's just a waterfall. I only included that in case the players really want to explore the edge of the river, just as a theme more than anything. But it would probably broadly remain the same. So if I just rename Virtus to Lethe, we'll be good. So let's do some. Should probably be organized about this whole thing. So we'll start at the top, work our way down now that I've exhausted the ideas I already had. So the estates, and the estates, as it says, is a collection of mansions where most of the nobility lives. These really would not exist in this version of Scour, in the Shadowfell. So what would be there? It's a primordial forest. I'm thinking at some point there should be a swamp, and I could fold the swamp into both the estates and the Grand, because they're at the outer edge of outer western edge of Clifftop. So that could be a swamp. So broad terms, go an old classic cliche, Swamp of Oblivion. This is an area of land where the waters, where the mists that frequently form, seemingly endless swamp, seemingly endless fog-shrouded swamp, where the fogs themselves are the waters of the Lethe, perhaps turn into a fog by magic through magical means or naturally occurring somehow, but breathing them in has a slight risk to give you struggle, make you struggle to remember things, or give you brain fog, the confusion spell. Maybe dial down the effects of that slightly for short excursions into it. So this is definitely going to be disorienting. What else would it be? Disorienting. I'm trying to stay away from words like dangerous because the whole place is designed to be dangerous and it's supposed to be. Confining. That the fog itself presses in on the player characters if they come here. And then otherworldly. With the memory altering, memory and perception altering effects of the swamp, perhaps there's some kind of hallucinatory effect that both audible and visual that can affect the players. And for me, an engaging environment is very much something that you're invested in, and I benefit from players. One of my players has the Haunted One background from Curse of Strahd, so they already see spirits when they don't want to, and another player is a Raven Queen patron warlock. So I think that he's definitely going to see stuff on this plane that the other player characters won't necessarily see because of his connection to it. Maybe it's not from the Raven Queen because in this act of the 3 campaign story, she's bound, and I envisage a large part of this story is freeing her. The campaign theme as a whole is waking the gods because the gods were imprisoned millennia ago. So each of my player characters has essentially been assigned to a god from D&D canon, from real world, from anything I could find really. So that's going to be a large section of it. And his Raven familiar, I've already established, can communicate when he wants to, but the players aren't sure, and I still haven't figured out if that's direct communication from the Raven Queen just through the Raven, or the familiar itself is an intelligent entity, being, what have you. The Arch. I like the idea of the Arch. I think the Arch should stay, but as it would have been. So currently it's a stone bridge with a permanent market town. What if it's an ensorcelled wooden bridge that once upon a time was created to be a refuge and safe crossing over the Lethe? Bridge of Refuge. Not just Bridge of Refuge. I'll probably... No, I don't like the thing of thing. Need a name. A wizard. A lich. Elvendrell's Crossing. Probably an elf, but it could easily just be a poncy human wizard. So it's designed to be a place of safe refuge. So, but being the Shadowfell for so long, it's corrupted. So, a corrupted refuge. imprisoning. So something happened with the spells they failed, whatever, what have you. Maybe they inverted, and everyone who was on the bridge at that time is now trapped on the bridge. And the player characters, if they manage to get onto it, have to find some way of getting off of it. Yeah, that sounds cool. Well, to me, like, it's all subjective, of course. But if they find the right way of doing so, it can also be a safe crossing. So maybe the people trapped on the bridge aren't initially hostile, and they're happy to help the party, but then the party could do something wrong, maybe, or something happens, and they kind of just switch, and the safe crossing becomes more dangerous than they expected. The farms, I think, I just remove entirely because there is no curtain wall here. I don't want it to be a one-to-one representation because that's not how the Shadowfell works in this game, in my understanding anyway. So I think I just remove the farms because there'll be no curtain wall because it's not a utopian city. So there's no real need for them. There's no agriculture. It would just be untended land anyway. So more primordial forest, maybe leading into twilight grassland. And the stairs themselves are artificial. They're hewn into the rock of the cliff to provide access to transport routes between cliff top and cliff bottom. So, sorry. So they wouldn't necessarily be there. The woods would still be there. They'd be more of the primordial forest. But I think I'll keep them, not as is, but there will be a distinct section of forest at cliff bottom. Because Scour itself is almost coastal. So I think having somewhere where it's kind of a coastal forest or a mangrove swamp. Obviously not mangroves, but similar lines. Have it like a saltwater swamp area. Yeah, I think we'll go with that. So, 1,000 veins of the sea. Just when I approach my naming conventions, sometimes they do the traditional like thing of thing or insert fantasy word here or make up a name and it belongs to them. Or in other cases like this, I like it to evoke something. And I very much want the players to feel like this Shadowfell is alive and not necessarily inimical to life, but very much almost an NPC in its own right. So a name like Thousand Veins of the Sea makes, to me, evokes the idea that the sea is alive. Reminds me the watch will be the Crimson Flats. There'll be a salt plain while the sea tides out. I'll do that in a few minutes. A Thousand Veins of the Sea. So this is a quote unquote mangrove swamp. It also means you can do some cool fish enemies if the players decide to spend an amount of time here that would result in them encountering anything hostile. So this is going to be twisted trees, blood red waters, and swarming life. So insects as well as fish, maybe packs of birds, flocks of birds. And again, a lot of this I won't give named locations to, because if the players want to investigate something, I'll think of a location then. It might not necessarily have a name and make it to this list, but I don't want to, as I said at the start, I don't want to over prepare. As a rule of thumb, I like to, if I do prep, which I don't always, but like I said, I'm trying to do more of. I want to do about half the playtime, and we only play for about 2 hours because of the venue we use and just travel time to and from. So I don't put too much thought into naming locations and things until it's on the spot. And I can always say afterwards that the name was slightly wrong or I misspoke. I believe in being honest with my players 100% when I've made a mistake or when I've forgotten something important. So just something to bear in mind. Honesty is important. Honesty and communication, really. Possibly the two most important things from a administrative, I guess, point of view. Anyway, the spray. The spray are just islands in the river, so they would still be there. They would not have a name. They're probably just islands. Call them Forgotten Islands because they're in the middle of the river of Lethe. Oh, hang on. I may have misspoken entirely. Here's where I find out I'm a fool. Unmindfulness, complete forgetfulness. I am not lying. That makes me quite happy. I always worry about misinforming people and sounding like I know everything about a subject when I really don't. I firmly believe that we're always learning. So these are just islands in the river. If the players end up here, probably have a similar effect to the Swamp of Oblivion, like a disorientating effect. But what I want, the kind of quote unquote mood board for this area, it's probably solitude, because there won't be anything on these islands. The river itself acting as a barrier. Hopelessness. And barren. These would just be rocks. Even ones with pools in, there won't be life in the pools necessarily, or if there is, there'll be a magical explanation for it. So, and something to bear in mind is things change. Never be 100% attached to an idea, because your players will constantly surprise you. And if you follow my DM style or GM style, you'll surprise yourself with what you say is happening. So yeah, really don't be attached to a certain idea. Allow flexibility. That's why I work in themes and generalizations more than anything when I do prep. The mist is not quarantined in the Shadowfell. So the mist, as I mentioned earlier, there is an aboleth in the Underdark, and the mist is an island at the base of the waterfall with a cave that leads to the Underdark, and this is where the aboleth sends its minions from. So hence the quarantine. In world, it's because a flood somehow magically the river flooded the cave and the fishing village built out front on the island itself. So the mist is going to be broadly the same. In fact, I might keep the name the same. I might edit, call it the Shrouding Mist. I like the idea of like a funeral shroud. That's not. There we go. The Shrouding Mists. But functionally, this is the same. This is an island leading to the Underdark. And if the players end up in the Underdark in the Shadowfell, that's going to be weird. and something I will enjoy exploring through play. I think I'll keep the themes the same. I don't think it needs changing. And again, when you're adapting stuff, don't feel like you need to change everything, even if it's your material. Like I take stuff from inspiration from other sources all the time, and it works, and you don't need to change everything. Some things you can just use whole cloth, and obviously if your players get the reference, that's fine. And they question it, just own up to it. There's no point lying. They've got the reference, but it's the sprawl. I mentioned the Saurus one earlier. I think this is just going to be the Sorrows. This is where a lot of the Saurus one end up because they aren't killed by the corpse-like braziers and torches. Because they aren't magically animate undead. Certainly in the way I'm using them in this. A Hyposaurus one. And this is going to be one of the storylines the player characters can pick up in this forest, which I need to name still, is that there's something controlling the Saurus and they're getting to Clifftop and assaulting the pockets of civilization, quote unquote, on Clifftop. So I want there to be an area where they're coming from. So this is a Hyrosaurus one. So it's not forgotten. It's not lonely. I like the word hive, but I've already used it. But there's nothing saying I can't reuse it. A chaotic hive. And obviously, it's not going to be every square foot has a Saurus one because that's not realistic in any way. So there will be places where the player characters can hide or investigate further. And there might be people living here, kind of in caves and stuff, shelters under the ground. And indeed, this might have been fallen center of civilization. And even though I'm, yes, streaming this and recording it, sometimes it just helps to talk through your ideas out loud. I don't talk to many people during the course of a day. I work from home. My partner worked full time from an office. So just talking things through out loud helps. And for those reasons, I've got into the habit of it. But if it's not something you do currently, think about doing it. You might surprise yourself. So it's a chaotic hive. It's a fallen center of civilization. But it is under the control of something. So it will have some purpose, a singular order. Everything's working towards the same goal. It's a hive mind. That's also not how you spell chaotic. And then, as I said, the watch is the Crimson Flats. So in the prime material plane in Scour, the watch is just, as it says, a small island at the end of the Virtus Delta, guards the sea approach to the city. The lock, which I removed from this aspect of the city, allows travel up and down the waterfall. So there's sea vessels can get to the docks and the merchants. So kind of the watch is there to prevent smuggling, but one of its themes is at the edge of the law. So there is a small amount of corruption. This is a watch, and this is going to be just a large soul plane. At low tide. And this is going to be an underwater forest. because there is unlife here. Life can exist here, so underwater forest. So even at low tide, there'll be strands of kelp and seaweed just standing up. Bizarre amphibious life. Haven of the Deep. Just occurred to me. Sounds cool. I can run with it. Yeah, bizarre amphibious life. And well, it could just be easy hunting. Some things get left by the tide, which will attract scavengers from other places, so that does add an element of danger to the whole proceedings. So I think that's good. I'm good for now. It's been about 51 minutes, so it's about the length of time I would like to spend on preparing for a session. I just need to name the forest, name this region, and all the names I can think of I've already used in the prime material plane. I want to have a better idea. Corpse Fire Cliffs. I see the Castle Corpse Fire as being kind of the seat of an ancient undead lord until beaten. So it laid claim to the dominion, laid claim to the surrounding area. So I hope that's been informative. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below or wherever else you'd like to leave them, really. As I said, I'm going to try and do more of these just to shed some light onto what goes on behind the scenes of running a game, because there's a lot of how to run the game, and there's a lot of obviously people running the game on Twitch and YouTube and other services. But I always find practical examples help. So this was me kind of trying to explain how I prepare to evoke themes and atmospheres in my games. And I'll probably return to this topic because it's one I'm not great at and it's something I need to work on. But I hope it was at least helpful and that you don't feel like you wasted the last nearly hour of your life. So until next time, see ya.